The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome to Beyond the Garden Gate. I'm your host, Linda Temperino, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Thomas Mickey, author of America's Romance with the English Garden. From Rye, New Hampshire, Tom is Professor Emeritus of Communication Studies at Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts. He graduated from the Landscape Institute, the Boston Architectural College. Tom's been gardening for almost 30 years and is a master gardener for Rockingham County since 1998. Tom's stories have also appeared in Seacoast media newspapers in New Hampshire and southern Maine. He's authored 4 books, including Best Garden Plants for New England. His newest book has been nominated for its annual Literature Award by the Council on Botanical and Horticultural Libraries. So let's get started and find out more about America's Romance with English Gardens. Welcome to the show, Tom. Thank you so much for joining us. Your credentials are quite impressive, but I would like to start with a few basic questions. Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Milwaukee, but I got a job working here in New England after I finished graduate school, so that got me out here initially, and we lived in Henniker and Concord for a long time, and that
Henniker's a lovely town.
It's a beautiful town. I love that. So that's what brought me out here initially.
That's very good, very great. And what brought you to New Hampshire? Was just the job that you
The
had
job,
in
New
Henniker?
England College, teaching communication at New England College. It's a great school. I loved it there.
It's an adorable campus.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and were your parents gardeners?
My father was, not my mother. My father was a gardener, so I would see him outside gardening. I remember the one plant I remember is sedum.
Oh yes.
He had these sedum, stone crop sedum. So it would come up, of course, every year. But he was so proud of those because it would get bigger every year.
Yes.
And he planted other things too along the fence. We lived in the back house, so we had a little fence separating our property from the neighbors, and he planted right along that fence.
Very nice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Memory.
That sedum it's a very nice plant for the garden. And I understand you're a master gardener. Do you want to explain what that is?
The master gardener for the county that I'm in, Rockingham County, is a privilege. I consider it a privilege. About 20 years ago, I decided to do this, and I took the training for 1 year. Well, it was really for about 3 months. Every Friday, we went to Concord to the Methodist Church, and UNH sponsors the Master Gardener program. So we had the course for those many weeks, and then at the end of the course, I was given the certificate to become a master gardener. And for the first year, I had to put in 40 hours of community service in some garden. Now, every year after the first year, then you have to put in 15 hours in order to keep your credentials. But it's a way to teach people in the county about gardening. So it's not like a garden club where it would be concerned about, for example, sprucing up a plot at the library or in a road. The master gardeners don't do that. It has to be education related. It has to be some way that you're educating people about gardening. So people working, for example, at Strawberry Bank as one of the docents, that would be community service that you could do. And several of our members do that, work at a place like Strawberry Bank. So I love it. You're always learning. Every month we go for meeting. We always have instructions. So you're always learning about gardening in the midst of it. So it's learning and community service.
And which gardens inspire you the most?
Well, in this area, I would say Strawberry Bank, number 1, and Prescott Park, Fuller Gardens, of course. And I love some of the historic gardens in Maine, in Kittery and York. I love those as well. So in terms of public gardens, those are really important to me. But I usually go on the tour in Portsmouth in June.
Those are the garden tours in
garden
Portsmouth.
tours, and I go to the garden tour in Newcastle. Usually I go to those 2 every year. And I just found out in the last couple of years about the Conservancy
Oh,
tours,
that's a
which I did
wonderful.
not know
Oh
about.
my gosh.
I just learned about
it's
that.
unbelievable.
Right.
I love the way they do it. You know, you can choose and pick which gardens you want to, and they have different
Exactly.
gardens on different weekends.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And a couple of years ago, I went to a wonderful garden, which was near Nashua, no, towards Manchester, I'm sorry, towards Manchester, Londonderry, I think, Londonderry. And the garden is at a bed and breakfast, and it's called, it's a bed and breakfast name, Tiffany's Bed and Breakfast. And her
I was
garden.
there last summer.
You were. It's a glorious garden. And I got to go to that one because of the Association for Landscape Designers that I belong to. So, and that was one of the tour gardens they had. So I also go to visit gardens through various groups that I belong to.
And this is your book, America's Romance with the English Garden. Tell me, how did you come up with this idea?
Well, it really began with my teaching. I taught for 30 years. I'm retired now, but I taught public relations writing at New England College first, and then I got a job at Bridgewater State University. So where I taught I taught at New England College for 10 years, and I taught at Bridgewater for 21 years. So I taught for 31 years.
Oh my goodness.
And while I was teaching at Bridgewater, I got the idea to look at how the garden became the kind of garden that we have from the 19th century seed and nursery catalogs, how they sold us the kind of garden that we have. Because people didn't know about gardening really in terms of media except through catalogs. Catalogs were the major source for information.
There were no books like this.
No books like that, really, that the ordinary person would have access to. If you were wealthy and you had private education or were able to afford that, you, of course, were in contact with English garden books that came to this country, and you would know them. But the ordinary middle-class person who didn't have access to that would depend on catalogs from the seed companies and the nurseries. And then when public education was introduced in this country, then people could read more common garden books as well. So in order to understand the garden from the 19th century, you have to know something about how the seed catalogs and the nursery catalogs talked about the garden. So while I was at Bridgewater, since I was teaching how to market your product, how to create written material that's going to make your product important to people, I was teaching that whole area. And so I came up with the idea to propose to the Smithsonian to come to Washington to study how the garden was promoted in the 19th century. And that meant studying the messages in the seed and nursery catalogs. And so they offered me a fellowship, and I spent a whole year in Washington studying these
lucky
catalogs.
you.
It was a wonderful experience. And the catalogs are preserved at the Museum of American History, the Department of Agriculture, and several other big archives down there. And so I did that. And then when that research was over, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but I was finding how the garden was talked about and what kind of garden it was and what was important in your garden. And when that year was over, I started to write a book, but I wasn't sure exactly what the major idea was. And when you write a book, you have to have one idea. That's what your thesis is, or your point you're trying to make. So then after 2 or 3 versions of the book, what the publisher, Ohio University Press, said, what you're really doing here is you're seeing how these catalogs sold us the English garden. And so I said, exactly. And so that became, then I kind of redirected the book to that major idea. But the resources are the catalogs.
What was it that made you interested in this particular topic of the seed catalogs?
Well, because I was interested in marketing the garden and how companies sold us the garden. I was interested in that question. The only way that you can study that question in the 19th century is by looking at the catalogs. There are no business records. Burpees doesn't have files of correspondence with their customers. There isn't anything like that. The only thing that's really preserved and quite extensively are the catalogs. If you go on eBay, for example, and you type in seed catalog 19th century or nursery catalog, a lot of them are for sale because by the end of the century they were being printed in the millions. So that was the only way that I felt I could study the business of. I looked at some advertising agencies by the 1880s, 1890s. Some firms like Burpees and James Vick were spending a lot of money on advertising firms. So I could look at their material at the American History Museum in the business archives. So that was not so much catalogs, it was correspondence about what they were going to say, and then the actual ads. So by looking at advertising, for example, in the 19th century, you can see what plants were important to people because the ads told you that. Just like today, when the White Flower Farm catalog comes, people have to have the most important or the newest plant. It's the
Absolutely.
Same thing was there. I just got a catalog from White Flower Farm, and I always look at it because it's a fun catalog to look at, and they tell you what the newest dahlias are, for example, and that's fun to know. So that's how I got. So the book is kind of a union of gardening and marketing. So it talks about gardens and plants, but it also talks about how these catalogs were very powerful in giving us a particular kind of garden, and that was the English garden.
How did you wind up at the Smithsonian?
Well, I knew that the question that I was asking was, how was the garden marketed to people in the 19th century? That was the question I was asking. Mm-hmm. And I knew that the Smithsonian had a department of horticulture. And the woman who was in charge of grants and scholarships at Bridgewater told me, Tom, you should go down to visit the Smithsonian to see if your idea to study the marketing of the garden would have any appeal to them. So they paid for me, Bridgewater paid for me to go down there one day. I came back the next day, and I met with the director of the Division of Horticulture. And I told her about my project, and she said, why don't you submit something? It sounds like a wonderful project. That's how it all began. Wow. Bridgewater really gave me the idea.
You never know what one open door is going to lead to. Yeah.
Exactly. And so they were very happy to offer me that fellowship. They give fellowships every year, but the normal the usual one is for somebody who's studying a particular plant. For example, the canna or the dahlia or lilies, that you're studying something and you want to go down there and look at its history. They love that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people apply from horticulture departments around the country, mm-hmm. and their projects are seriously considered as well.
How long did it take you to write this book?
Well, the research took me 1 year, but then actually writing the book, I finished that in 2007. So I wrote the book for about 4 years. It took me about 4 years to write the book, because it's a lot.
That's quite a commitment.
It is a commitment, mm-hmm. and I learned a great deal in doing it as well.
Any experiences along the way that you'd like to share about this book?
Well, one of the things I would love to share about the book is how our gardens replicate in so many ways the English garden to this very day. We have to have roses. We have to plant our veggies behind the house. We need a lawn. All of those are remnants of the English garden.
And a gravel driveway.
And a gravel driveway. You have to have that. That's all part of the... And flowering trees, spring flowering trees. Those are really important for us as well. And all of those are elements of the classic English garden. Mm-hmm. And eventually water becomes important, some kind of fountain or even a small, and rock gardens. So that's what I learned. And visiting gardens really is important. But the English always hid their garden behind the house. They didn't, the only thing you saw when you came into the property was the big lawn. Just like Downton Abbey, mm-hmm. when you come into that Highclere Castle property, you just see the big building and then you see the gravel path up front and the lawn. But in the back, 5 acres of cutting gardens and vegetable gardens, kitchen gardens mm-hmm. behind the house.
They had to grow their own flowers because they didn't have a florist.
Exactly. Cutting for cutting. Mm-hmm. So today we have often gardeners will do this. They'll have a garden just for cutting things to bring in the house. And they'll have another garden just for show. So but you never cut anything from the show garden, and that's that tradition of the English garden. So a lot of things that we do in our own gardening kind of reflect that.
It's still a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun.
How much gardening do you do today?
Well, I'm retired from my teaching, and I'm able to spend more time during the good warm weather outside than I could in previous years. So every day I'm outside. Now, in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been outside in the afternoon. Now, this year, I'm going to revamp my work in the garden and try to do it in the morning, like 9 to 11. I'm going to try that. Even though my property is only 3/4 of an acre, still demands a lot of maintenance for me, because I have a lot of shrubs. I have many perennials. I have 125 hostas, for example,
Oh my
scattered
goodness.
throughout my whole property. And I do a lot of annuals, and I have shrubs as well, especially hydrangeas. I love hydrangeas. My property has a lot of shade, so that I have to have plants that do well in the
A
shade.
friend of mine has over 30 in his garden.
30 hostas?
Hydrangeas.
Oh, hydrangea. That is a lot of hydrangeas.
That's a lot of work.
Oh, that is.
That's because you know how they have to be pruned and
Yeah.
mulched, and
And you have to know what variety they are so that you prune them.
whether it's on old wood or new
Old
wood.
wood or new-
yeah.
or new
But they're
wood.
just as, I think hydrangeas are just as much work as roses.
Yeah, you're probably right in the
Yeah.
long run. Although I have a couple of rose bushes. I have knockout rose
Yep.
and New Dawn.
But they don't smell.
They don't.
They don't have the fragrance.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah. Yeah, that's the trade-off.
Yeah. Your interest in the seed and nursery catalog is of the 19th century. Where did that interest come from?
Well, that interest came from my first day at the Smithsonian, really.
Okay.
When I met with my supervisor, and she said, "Where are you going to begin?" I think I can begin only with the seed catalog. So I would take my computer and I would look at these catalogs. I probably looked at 2,000 catalogs over the period of the year. So I would jot down things that the owner, usually the owner, at the beginning of the catalog, there's always a wonderful essay, sometimes called introduction, sometimes called welcoming, sometimes called introductory. And they would always have wonderful things to say about gardening, how important it was, and how it was possible for anybody to do gardening. That was a neat thing about the catalogs. It was always for the ordinary gardener. Even though everybody, whether you were very wealthy or not, read these catalogs, it was really for trying to appeal to the ordinary middle-class gardener.
Do you have a vegetable garden?
I do not have any vegetables because I have too much shade. I've tried to grow tomatoes, and I have wonderful leaves, but I don't really get any tomatoes. And I did container garden with tomatoes, so then I would move the container. I had better luck when I moved it to a sunnier spot. But
I'd rather go to the local farm stand, let them do
Yeah.
all the work. A vegetable garden is a tremendous amount of work.
in Rye, we're lucky because both in Rye and in Portsmouth, we have wonderful farmers markets. In Rye on Wednesday and in Portsmouth on Saturday. There was a fellow visiting from California who said that the Portsmouth farmers market far outdistances any farmers market he's seen in California,
Is that right?
with all the vegetables they have to offer. And they
And our growing season
They
is
do
so
breads.
short.
The growing season is so short, but now they'll be out, in May, early June with lettuce, of course, all that
Cold
kind
weather,
of crop.
yeah.
Cold weather.
So what is your next book going to be about?
Well, I'm working on a new book, which is based a little bit on the catalogs, but it's based on one man's seed industry, James Vick in Rochester, New York, who was one of the biggest seed peddlers in the 19th century. And the book, current working title of the book is Selling Victorian Flowers. His major goal in life was to make flowers available to everybody. And so he offered cheap seeds to anybody who wanted them. And he had a marvelous array of flowers to sell. So what I am interested in, particularly because the marketing and public relations of the seeds are really important to me, my book is based on how he promoted his seeds to create the Victorian garden. So that's what I'm working on.
Oh, well, that's going to be interesting.
And we sell, this is interesting today, we still grow the Victorian flowers like alyssum, lobelia, alternanthera. There are certain flowers that were really important to Victorian gardeners. And we grow them today, just coleus. Now you would think that this is 125 years. We would grow different flowers. But these marketers were so powerful at the end of the 19th century that these flowers have become really instilled in us as the essential flowers for you to have in your garden. Well, today we've added, for example, cosmos, although that's there.
It's been around
Marigolds,
for a long,
they've been around for a long time. Those are very powerful flowers that he sold in the late 19th century. When we were in Italy, we went to Italy probably 10 years ago. And we went to the Isle of Capri as part of our tour. And we went to this garden there, which was wonderful. And there was a little greenhouse, a nursery selling plants near this house. There I saw petunias, marigolds, impatiens. All the flowers that we sell here sold there at that garden. Which tells me that that marketing is really important in selling plants for the garden.
Yeah.
So that's my current book.
That's great. Well, this has been nice, Tom. Very, very nice sharing your experiences with us. And I'd love to have you come back when you have your next book published, and we can promote that again.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today, and I certainly hope you enjoyed hearing about Tom Mickey's book, America's Romance with the English Garden. It would make a wonderful addition to your gardening library. By the way, if you have or if you know someone who has a garden you would like to see highlighted on this show, please contact the station and they'll be in touch. Again, thanks for joining us and hope you'll join us again real soon. That's it for now. Bye.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.